Hey you guys, I had a really interesting game today that I'm going to share with you in a minute, but it reminded me of my favourite move in chess, my number one favourite move. And so I've done a little bit of research for you and have come up with a lot of examples of where the best move in chess can be played to devastating effect. So first of all, let me just show you one example. Okay, so this comes from the Wade defense, from the pits. So e4, and let's say black plays d6. Now knight comes out, and this is the Wade defense. So the bishop comes flying out, pinning the knight against the queen. All right. So far, so good. Now, it doesn't really make sense for the bishop to capture right now because it just allows the queen to come out for free, and that actually gives white a development advantage. So now we bring out our bishop to c4, the Italian position here, looking down at f7. And let's say black just plays a normal developing move, just brings out the knight. You know, everything is normal, nothing's out of place, we've developed a couple of pieces, nothing wrong. But now, the devastating bishop takes f7, the best move in chess. Well, I think it is, right? And now, you know, what's the king going to do, right? So he either runs away and loses castling rights, or he captures the bishop, okay? So he's almost certain to capture the bishop, but now the devastating knight g5 check, with a discovered attack by the queen on the bishop that thought it was so clever, pinning the knight, right? But if a pin piece can move with check, that's okay. So let's say the king retreats, queen captures the bishop, and now look at the board. Both sides are a bishop down, both the light squared bishops are off the board, right? However, white still has all of his pawns, whereas black has lost Freddy the f-pawn, and black's king has already been forced to move. So now it's just horrible for black. White's going to get ready to castle, just complete development and carry on. Okay, here's another alternative. So e4, d6, knight comes out, bishop pins, bishop to c4, and let's say c5 is played. Same deal, right? King captures, check. Queen's going to get this. So this is what to look out for. Now, let's say we have like a different move order. Let's say that knight comes out, right? So now, whatever happens, this is not on the cards anymore. And the reason is because the knight is covering this square. So let's say instead of that, yeah, bishop comes out, right? So now you can't play it because takes, check, king retreats, and the queen can't grab the bishop because the bishop is defended by the knight. Okay. Also note that if the e-pawn is moved, the same thing doesn't work. So bishop comes out, and now if you go bishop takes, check, queen takes knight, because the e-pawn has vacated e7, and white's queen is under attack, and this is just horrible. Okay. So this is like the Philidor style. Okay, so what are we looking out for? We are looking out for Eddie, the e-pawn is still in place, preventing the queen from seeing g5. All right, this bishop has come out to pin. This bishop is out here, and then, you know, whatever black does, you have this option here. Okay, with the queen threatening to do that. All right, now, so this game is actually the game that I played this morning that inspired me to look into this a bit deeper. And this is actually Sicilian. So my opponent's rated just over 1500. We have e4, c5, knight to f3, the open Sicilian. Very often just supporting d4. Okay, now the most common moves here will be this pawn out or this knight out. So we have knight to c6 and now c3. So I'm playing the Alapin variation with c3 supporting d4. So very common idea. d4 is now played, takes, and white's got a slightly better centre here. Now the bishop comes flying out, right, pinning my knight. So in this instance, I play bishop to b5, pinning black's knight. And I'm kicked, and I retreat now to c4. Maybe anticipating this, okay? Now, b5 is played, hitting my bishop, and I see that it's on, right? Bishop takes f7, check. King takes. Knight to g5. So you can see the pattern here. I've got my bishop there, black's bishop's here, pinning my knight, and the e-pawn hasn't moved, and this knight is not out, all right? So king is in check. I grab the bishop. So I'm a pawn up, but more importantly, black's king's been forced to move. Knight comes in, attacking my queen. I'll simply retreat the queen to d1. We have a pawn kicking the knight here. My knight now jumps in, attacks the queen and the bishop. And I reinforce the knight. Knight then comes back. We trade off in the middle. And black's pawn structure is now starting to look horrible. Okay, develop my final knight. Black now decides to push b4, attacking the knight, because the knight can't progress to any of these squares. However, I now have queen to a4 check. King moves, I grab the pawn, so I'm now 2 pawns up. Knight retreats, white castles, knight improves, and now f4. Right, the king is being forced to go on a little walk. So what do we want to do? King's in line with the rook. We just want to get rid of these pawns. We want to open up the middle of the board. Okay, attacks the queen. Queen d4. Knight moves, kick the knight. Knight retreats. e5, putting the pressure on and threatening e6 with check and a fork on the knight. So we have pawn takes with check, discovered check by the rook. King retreats. Queen e4. Now the queen gives a check, king dodges, g5 is played, d6, now threatening this pawn, but with a discovery on this rook. My opponent moves the pawn but misses the rook. I capture the rook, and that's the end of the game. All right, so you can get this from the Sicilian as well. So here, bishop comes out. Now at this point I could simply send my bishop straight flying out there, just to prepare this idea, okay? So it can come from the Sicilian, okay? But that's not all. Let's move on. This is the Jerome Gambit, okay? So e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop out. So this is the gioco piano, right? This is the Italian game. This is the gioco piano, which means the quiet game in Italian. And now we dive straight in with bishop takes f7. Okay, I mean, this is a super common position. This position has been seen maybe 20,000 times at the master level, right? This is very common. Bishop dives in with check, and if the king takes, knight takes e5, right? Obviously, knight can't come here because the e-pawn has moved, so the queen is guarding that. Knight takes e5 seems to be a sacrifice, all right? And now, so the knight takes the knight, but now queen h5, check. And the king's going to have to move. King comes here, we've got another check, forcing the king away. The knight is going to fall, the king has already moved, the bishop could then fall as well. We've got a vulnerable pawn, vulnerable rook. It's all horribly wrong. Okay, so remember this one, the Jerome Gambit from the Italian game. If you play the Italian, your opponent ever does this, maybe this is worth a try. I'll just check whether have I ever had this in. Okay, so I've had more than 100 of these, and I've never played bishop takes f7 in this. Oh, I have apparently once. And then king takes. Yep. Knight takes e5. Knight takes e5. Queen h5 check. Apparently I went on to lose this game. I don't know how I managed to do that, but there you go. So that's the Jerome Gambit from the gioco piano. Right, another one. This is a queen trap. e4, e5. Bishop comes flying out, and an aggressive queen move. Queen g5. Attacking this pawn. Now that your bishop has moved out and is no longer defending the pawn, queen comes out to attack the pawn, and what do you do as white? you ignore it. Knight to f3, hitting the queen and encouraging the queen to capture on g2. Okay, then rook g1 is obvious. The knight's defending this pawn, the knight's defending the rook, rook's attacking the queen, queen's defending the knight, everything's actually safe. We've given up a pawn, and we've given up kingside castling rights, okay? But there's only one move for the queen. Queen has to go to h3. And now, guess what? Bishop takes f7 check, and if the king, or if the player with the black pieces is not paying attention and captures that, boom, knight to g5, check. But what's more, it's a royal fork. King and queen forked. Well and truly. There we go. So that's an absolute beauty. So if you play the bishop's opening and you see the queen coming out, wow, you'll pick up definitely some blitz games that way. All right. Have you got appetite for any more? This is called the boy variation, also from the bishop's opening. Now, here, if black plays bishop to c5, guess what we do? You're not going to believe it. Bishop takes f7 check. And if king takes, queen h5 check, right? Let's say pawn blocks the check. Okay, now we have queen takes e5. We're attacking the bishop. We're also attacking the rook. Black's king has moved. Black has lost 2 pawns. And it's just looking horrible. Okay, so remember this one. If you play the bishop's opening and your opponent just does a copycat, boom. Okay, so I mean, there's not really much that black can do in this situation. He's in check. He can go. He's got 4 squares he can move to. 2 of them would fall again to queen f5 check. This pawn is going to fall, and then this pawn or this bishop. It's just very, very unpleasant. Okay, but it doesn't even stop there. Now, this is the hacksaw Gambit. This is an old favourite of mine. Again, comes from, well, this one is from the Scotch. You can get it similar from the Italian as well. So we offer up a pawn with d4, and then we don't recapture. You could recapture. The normal Scotch game would probably be knight recaptures, but this comes from the Scotch Gambit. So you bring out the bishop to c4, and ignoring the fact that you've given away a pawn, but what you're doing is you're getting quick development. Now, if your opponent plays bishop out to c5, you can't do this move just yet. It doesn't really make sense. So what you do is you play c3, and then if the pawn takes, boom, bishop takes f7 check. If king takes, queen d5 check, comes with a fork on the king and the bishop. Now, what I do if the king comes back here, then you simply take the bishop with check again, and then you'll pick up this pawn, or you'll play knight takes c3. Okay. If the king goes to this square, then I throw in queen h5 check, and then if you're trying to prompt this pawn to advance, okay, then you go and grab the bishop. And if black gets greedy and thinks, well, you know, my pawn on c3 is a goner, and captures on b2, you've got bishop takes there, and then what's going to happen with this rook? Okay, it's not going to end well for black again. Now here's another one from the Scotch. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. Okay, so this is the Italian game, but it turns into a variation of the Scotch. Okay, so 2 knights defense in the Italian. Now d4 is played, pawn advance, and here e5. Okay, now the knight comes down to a safe square, but now look, bishop takes f7 check. Okay, and here the e-pawn has gone, but we don't have a pawn on d2, so this square is available for the knight. Okay, and this has been played a few times at the master level. Okay, but king takes there, and now you've got check, right? So king is likely to go to one of these squares, and the queen can pick up the knight, and play on. Now at the master level, this tends to be better for black. Okay, so this is the Dubois Reti, apparently. Okay, so at the master level, it's not great. I don't know if how many times have I played this? Okay, I've played this a few times. Yep. But here I have always castled, right? I've never played this move here. All right. So there's actually a few more. This is a real world game. And it's the nakmansen Gambit. Okay. E4, E5. So it's from the Italian. And the two knights. And D4. Pawn takes. Castles. Right. So this is played between a couple of 2,000 rated players. And now the knight grabs the pawn on E4. And look at this. Knight C3 offering up a piece. And pawn takes. Bishop takes F7 check. Right? Now king takes D5. Queen D5. Comes with check. Hitting both knights. This one's undefended. So king moves back. And the queen doesn't even grab the knight here. We pin the knight with rook to E1. Bishop blocks. Grab the knight. Okay, and now the bishop comes flying out. This bishop is pinned, so it can't do anything. Black grabs a pawn. White doubles up. And we have the following sequence. So here, knight comes in here. Pawn again can't take because the queen would take the rook. What a game. Okay, we have pawn in to attack. Queen comes back with check. We have a block. Queen comes here now looking at this rook. Wow. Queen grabs knight. Wow. Look at this. Now, how many of us would have thought of that move? And that wins the game for white. So basically, there's any number of checks. If the rook was to take, we've got queen takes. What a horrible situation for that. So the nakmansen Gambit. So another one to remember. So this is like a slightly, Scotch Gambit here, but offering up that knight is just really, really ambitious. White here is 7 points behind in material, okay, but wins the game through just sheer force. Beautiful, beautiful game. All right. Couple more. This is very famous. You'll know this one. This is the Legal Trap. Italian game. And now D6 is played. Okay. Knight comes out. Bishop comes out to pin. Kick the bishop. Bishop retreats. Now look at this. Knight takes E5. This has been played 5 times. This position has been reached 5 times. This has been played once at the master level. No, apparently twice. Okay, knight takes E5. So, white appears to be offering up the queen, or appears to have blundered the queen. Okay. Bishop takes queen. And bishop takes F7 check. Now, there's only one legal move here. The king can't capture the bishop, it's defended by the knight, and the king can't go here because it's protected by the knight. Okay. Now, king E7, and now knight to D5, and it's checkmate. That's one of the most beautiful and elegant checkmates that you can get. Okay, so where do you get it? If you're an Italian player, your opponent plays a quiet D6, bring out your knight. Wow. And it's the Oh No My Queen. Classic one. Okay, a couple more. This one actually comes from the Queen's Gambit. So, and interestingly, a game played by Kasparov, who resigned on move 7 here. And it's actually it was in a rapid tournament, blitz tournament, and Kasparov, with resigning on move 7, this is actually the quickest loss by any former world champion ever. Okay, so it's the Queen's Gambit. So D4, D5, C4, and Queen's Gambit accepted, which is slightly unusual these days. Okay, so pawn takes C4, E3, e5. Knight comes out, pawn takes e5, bishop takes c4, and now, with this move, this is actually very risky. Okay, there a couple more moves were played in the actual game that this comes from, but the big risk here is bishop takes f7 check, right? Now the king can't take the bishop. Why? Because the king is the only defender of this queen, right? So queen would take queen. So the king has to move. And I don't know what we would do now. Lots and lots of options. You can simply grab the knight. You could grab off the queen, force the king to move anyway, right? Or force the king to move again. You could simply, I don't think grabbing the pawn makes sense because then you fall for queen takes, or just drop the bishop back. So lots of options. So this comes from the Queen's Gambit accepted line. Okay, last one. And from the Scandinavian, would you believe? You can even get this bishop sacrifice in the Scandinavian. So your white e4, d5 takes, queen takes, knight to c3, very often played, and queen to d8 is very typical. At the master level, this is actually the third most popular move after queen to a5 and queen to d6. Third most popular is queen to d8. And I've seen this plenty of times in my own games. So now the bishop comes out to c4. Now knight to f6, knight to f3. Bishop comes out to pin the knight. You can start to see a pattern here, right? Now here, of course, the knight is out. So the knight is defending this square. But we go ahead with knight to e5 anyway, okay? And because if the bishop takes the queen, bishop takes f7, it's not bishop takes f7 check, bishop takes f7 checkmate. What a beautiful checkmate, right? So the bishop can't take the queen here. So in this game, the bishop retreats to here, and actually the queen now captures the bishop. And if knight takes, same again, checkmate. So there you go, whistle-stop tour around the wonderful world of bishop takes f7 check. I mean, would you have ever thought that this comes up in so many different ways, and there are so many different traps? But the beauty of it is that you're capturing the f pawn, right? The f7 pawn is defended only by the king, right? And it comes with check. So if you take that, the king is forced to do something. The king is either going to have to capture, and remember at the start of the game, the king is also the only defender of the queen. So this is, it's like the idea of the overworked defender, right? At this point in time, the start of the game, the queen is defended only by the king, and so is the f-pawn, right? And that's where it all comes from. So, you know, let's just go back a bit to the beginning here. What we looked at, the Wade defense, just bring your bishop out. And if your opponent doesn't move the e-pawn or doesn't move this knight, then you've got bishop takes f7, and there you go. So there are lots of other ideas with distracting the king and deflecting the king away from the defense of the queen. For example, in the Tennyson Gambit. So that comes about with this, and then let's say knight comes out to defend the pawn, takes, and now if this is played, okay, so this isn't a bishop takes f7 check, but this is similar. The king is deflected away from the defense of the queen, and there you go. And the king cannot retreat to here because it'll still be in check, and the queen is going to be lost, okay? So be aware of this in your games. Very few of us would actually consider sacrificing a piece that early, but when we look at the Chess Bootcamp checklist, you know, considering all your possible candidate moves and attacking opportunities is very important. So how do we develop this skill of considering new candidate moves? Well, it comes with practice. You have to just start considering. You have to start looking at moves and saying, Is that playable? Could that work? Maybe that could work. Could it work? I think it could work. And then you try it out, and then you build it into your repertoire. But this is definitely a move that I want you guys to consider, because it is just purely venomous. So there you go. Hope this has been fun for you. It's been fun for me making it and doing a bit of research on it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.